Dear people watching and listening, Assalamu alaikum. Kindly like and share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please support my channel by contributing to my Patreon account so that I can continue making the audiobook series. This book tells in detail about the Muslim conquest of Spain under the Umayyad Caliphate from 711 AD to 718 AD. The conquest is also known as the Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula or the Umayyad conquest of the Visigothic kingdom. This conquest destroyed the Visigothic kingdom and established the Umayyad wilaya of Al-Andalus. It also resulted in the expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate and the Muslim rule into Europe. Start of Chapter 15. The Conquest of the North. The winter passed, followed by the spring of 714. If we take April as the starting point of spring, this would be Rajab of the year 95 Hijri. In Madrid it is said that the winter lasts till the 40th of May, but from April onwards the weather would be good enough for the Muslims to start campaigning. This time they would take all of what remained of Spain, and what remained of Spain was northern half of the peninsula. In spite of the hostility between Musa and Tariq, the combination of the two generals was to prove unbeatable. Musa with his experience and wisdom, his strategical grasp and political acumen, Tariq with his tactical brilliance and dash, his colorful leadership and drive, were to provide between them all the qualities needed for war and conquest, for campaigns and battles. Musa was the first to acknowledge the importance of Tariq. He showed how central the Berber general was to his scheme of conquest by placing him and his Berber warriors in front of the advance. Tariq would lead the Muslim army, going from objective to objective within the strategical design conceived and outlined by Musa, with the commander-in-chief following with the bulk of the army to consolidate and organize the conquest. While we have been given no precise dates by the historians, it is known that the next campaign was carried out over the spring and summer of 714. We start with the spring, choosing April as a reasonable starting point. We do not know the strength of the force which now operated under Musa and Tariq, but in view of the fact that garrisons had been left in every important town taken by the Muslims, and that the necessity for a large concentration of troops no longer existed, the army may have numbered 20,000. About a third of this or a little more was Tariq's division. Tariq was not the advance guard, he was the commander of the leading division, within which a regiment acted as advance guard under an Arab officer named Muhammad bin Ilyas. Tariq organized his command as a light, fast-moving cavalry division suitable for rapid movement, unfettered by a cumbersome supply system. Every man carried all that he needed on his person and his horse. He had his weapons and armor, a bag of rations and a copper kettle, the use of which he shared with his comrades. Some soldiers may have enjoyed the luxury of a change of clothing. Provisions for each tribe and clan were placed on a number of mules in proportion to its strength, giving the force all that it needed for a few days without replenishment from local foraging. Men less suited than others for combat were placed in charge of the mule train. There were no vehicles, and before the march began, the men were reminded once again that they could acquire plunder only on the field of battle or on taking possession of cities by force. Musa's first strategical objective was that the Muslims were to call the upper frontier, corresponding to the Spanish province of Saragossa, on the river Ebro, which was to become the capital of the future kingdom of Aragon. Saragossa was an important center of communication, the capture of which was essential for the successful launching of further operations. So with Saragossa as objective, Tariq set off from Toledo. The advance guard arrived at Guadalajara, which Tariq had taken but evacuated in his very first campaign. There was no opposition. The advance guard occupied Guadalajara, but soon after, on the orders of Tariq, resumed the advance in the direction of Saragossa. Saragossa was an ancient town which had been in existence since the Celtiberian period, hundreds of years before the start of the Christian era. It was then called Salduba. In 24 BC, at the end of the Celtiberian War between the Romans and the local Spaniards, the Romans refounded it as their chief military station in the Ebro Valley and a cantonment where legionnaires could retire. They called it Caesarea Augusta or Caesarea Augusta, which the Muslims wrote as Sargusta. It was a white city surrounded by emerald green gardens. Because of its whiteness, the Muslims called it Madinatu Bayza, the White City. Tariq arrived at Saragossa to find the gates closed and the city prepared to defend itself. He sent a messenger with the usual offer: Islam, the jizya, or the sword. Within the city, a heated argument was in progress among the leaders as to what course to follow. Bishop Bencio, the highest dignitary of the church, was doing his best to persuade the others, especially the clerics, not to rely on the promise of safety offered by the Muslims, but to evacuate the city with all the possessions that they could carry, the most important of which were the religious relics and the treasures of the church. But Bencio was in a minority. Most of the others preferred to stay and surrender in peace. The inhabitants of the city too were loath to leave their homes and property. Consequently, the leaders accepted Tariq's offer of peace on payment of the jizya and opened the gates, whereupon the Muslims marched in and occupied Saragossa. Soon after, Musa arrived in the city with the main body of the army. He agreed with the decision of Tariq and confirmed the terms of surrender. From here, Musa now sent out fast columns to subdue the surrounding countryside, which proved an easy task because everywhere the Muslims rode, they found a populace too frightened to oppose them. Moreover, what they had heard of the just and benign treatment received by their fellow Christians at the hands of the conquering Muslims further weakened their desire to fight them. In fact, it was a positive encouragement to surrender, and all of them willingly and wisely submitted. The province of the upper frontier came under Muslim control without an arrow being shot. Henceforth, the awe inspired in Christian hearts by the rapid and convincing victories of the Muslims in all their tactical actions would be an important factor facilitating Muslim conquest. Within Saragossa, no harm came to the people or their property or the churches. Everyone could live in peace and security, in possession of what was his, and could pray unmolested in his church. The Muslims confiscated the official treasures and any valuable, easily movable property belonging to the state. They also took the wealth of the churches. For the Muslims, the church was worthy of respect as a place of worship. In their simple concept, it was a temple of God, not a place for storing gold and silver and gems and pretty idols. So they took what treasure they found in the churches and left the churches intact for use by the Christians. This was to become a normal practice in all cities conquered by the Muslims in Spain. Musa appointed the venerable Hansh bin Abdullah as governor of Saragossa. Hansh was a tabi'i and at once began to make plans to build a mosque. In fact, his is believed to be the first mosque built in Spain, starting as a simple structure which was to be considerably enlarged and embellished over the succeeding generations. But the Muslim conquerors did not wait for Hansh to build his mosque. They set off for further conquests, again with Tariq in the lead. One after the other, the cities of the northeast opened their gates to Tariq. The better-known ones among these cities were Huesca, Lerida, and Barcelona, the last named being the greatest prize of the region. There was no opposition anywhere. Musa followed in the steps of Tariq, confirming the arrangements made by him, and confiscating the treasures of the palaces and the churches. From Barcelona, Tariq marched southwards and took Tarragona, Valencia, Játiva, and Denia. This brought him very close to Alicante, which had been taken the year before by the column sent up by Abdulaziz from Orihuela. Tariq arranged terms of surrender at every conquered city and organized its administration as part of the Muslim state, leaving behind a small garrison at each place to ensure compliance on the part of the population. Then he marched back to join Musa at Barcelona. While Tariq was operating south of Barcelona, Musa had sent a strong column northwards which conquered Girona and the coastal district. Thus, by the time Tariq returned to the main body of the army, the whole of the east coast of Spain was in Muslim hands. Having consolidated his hold on Barcelona and the east coast, Musa turned his attention to the north, to what is now France. It was not then France. The southwestern region of what is now France was part of the Visigothic kingdom of Spain. Moreover, the geographical continuation of the coastal zone of Spain into the coastal zone of France made it natural for Musa to go on with the conquest of what he regarded as the same region. Thus his next objective was Narbonne. Again Tariq took the lead. He marched through the coastal zone and got to Narbonne, which was an important city of the Visigothic kingdom. While accounts conflict as to how it was taken, it is clear that a big battle was fought at Narbonne. The Goths put up a stubborn resistance to the invaders, but again the army of Islam prevailed and the Christians were defeated. Narbonne submitted to the Muslims with a vast amount of treasure falling into their hands. Some writers believe that Musa never went to Narbonne, that he stayed within the boundaries of what is now Spain proper. Others maintain that he did much more, that he took Carcassonne and Toulouse, even went on to take Avignon and Lyons on the river Rhone. The last mentioned accounts have probably confused Musa's operations with the operations of his successors. What is evident, and this is supported by most Muslim and Christian historians, is that Musa took Narbonne and probably nothing beyond it. The booty taken at Narbonne was among the richest that came into the possession of the Muslims during this campaign. Apart from the treasures found in the palaces and churches, they emptied a pond filled with diamonds, rubies, and emeralds, and found 7 statuettes of horsemen with man and horse made of solid silver, even some columns made entirely of silver. These descriptions of immense treasures are probably exaggerated, but what is beyond doubt is that a great deal of booty was taken by the Muslims, of which 4/5 were distributed among the soldiers and 1/5 kept as the share of the state. Of the latter, according to the allegations of Tariq, not all was sent by Musa to Damascus. This was the farthest north that Musa went in his conquest. From here, he would turn back. The cause of the Muslim return, however, has become a subject of legend. According to one account, Musa came upon a vast plain full of ruins, where he found a colossal monument like a column, upon which was inscribed in Arabic characters, "O sons of Ismail, you have come, now go back." Musa was startled at reading this. The words on the column became known to everyone in the army, and the soldiers came to regard this as a sign from heaven that they had gone far enough. They came to Musa and said, "Where are you taking us? We are content with what we have in our hands." Musa is said to have remarked, "By Allah, if they would follow me, I would lead them to the gates of Rome and conquer it, God willing." The first part of the story is invention, the second part probably true. This has often happened in military history, an untiring general tiring out his men and driving them to the limits of endurance. Musa turned back. This was his only incursion into the land of the Franks, the rest of which he left for others to subdue in the years that followed. Musa is reported by Muslim historians to have toyed with the idea of plunging deep into the Christian world. He wanted to fight his way through infidel lands until he had got to Constantinople and Damascus. He had visions of building a great highway between Spain and Syria, so that the faithful could travel from one to the other without entering upon the sea. It is unlikely that a man of Musa's judgment and wisdom would launch the army on such a perilous venture. He may have considered the possibility of such a campaign, and he seems to have mentioned it to his officers, but whatever the truth of the report, it was to the good fortune of the Muslims that Musa did not put any such plan into effect, because very few would have survived such a campaign. Musa returned from Gaul laden with spoils. He marched back to Saragossa. He had hardly unpacked and begun planning the next campaign when he received a message from the Caliph ordering him to return to Damascus. The man who brought the message was none other than Mughis al-Rumi, just back from Syria. The instructions of the Caliph were quite clear. Musa was to leave the army in Spain and return in person to Damascus, bringing Tariq with him. It was obvious that there was going to be a settlement of accounts. Mughis did not tell Musa that he himself was responsible. The Muslims had taken all but the northwestern part of Spain, which was called Galicia, but this name was meant not the present small province of Galicia at the tip of Spain, but the entire northwestern region of the peninsula, which included Old Castile, Leon, and present Galicia, in fact all that lay south of the Cantabrian mountains. The Muslims even spoke of Zamora as the capital of Galicia. The name of Castile, in its Arabic form, did not come into use by the Muslims till much later. This was one of the poorer parts of Spain. The people inhabiting the region were for the most part barbarians, of whom an interesting description has come down to us. The people are base and filthy and of low morals. They bathe only once or twice a year with cold water. They never wash their clothes, which fall off when they are worn out. But they are a powerful people who seek not flight but death in battle. Musa had set his heart on the conquest of this yet unconquered part of Spain. He suspected that once he was in Damascus, he would not return. He would have to complete his work now before commencing his homeward journey. He worked on Mughis. He outlined his plan, emphasized how important it was to take Galicia, and what riches awaited the conqueror. In this he exaggerated a bit, and as a temptation offered to give Mughis a share of what he himself would gain from the spoils of this campaign. Mughis was a gay cavalier of adventurous spirit, never averse to acquiring more slaves and wealth. He acquiesced. He would go along with Musa. There were two main roads leading from Saragossa to Galicia. One was the northern route, which went along the river Ebro to Hara, then west to Astorga in present Leon province, from where it continued to La Coruña. The other followed the bank of the Ebro from some distance before leaving it, to go in a westerly direction south of the other route to Palencia and Benavente. According to Musa's plan, the Muslims would advance on a broad front in two columns, Tariq to the north and Musa to the south. They would sweep across Galicia between the Cantabrian mountains and the Sierra de Guadarrama. Sometime in midsummer, it would be about June 714, Shawwal 95 Hijri, Tariq set off from Saragossa to be followed a little later by Musa. He advanced along the river, and at some stage during this march occurred the conversion to Islam at the hands of Tariq, of an exalted Gothic noble. This was Count Cassius, governor of the Ebro Valley region, a powerful lord hailing originally from Tarazona in what is now the province of Navarra. This led to the conversion of others and helped in reducing opposition to Muslim operations in Aragon and Vasconia. Count Cassius, or Cassi as the Muslims called him, remained faithful to Islam as did his family. It is believed that he journeyed to Damascus with Musa and swore allegiance to Caliph al-Walid. His descendants were to establish a Gothic Muslim dynasty called Banu Qasi, which ruled for several generations over the northeastern part of Spain. After a few days of marching along the river, Tariq turned north into Vasconia, the land of the Basques, with its capital at Pamplona. The Basques put up little resistance, probably because of Count Cassius. Pamplona opened its gates and was given an assurance of peace and security in return for submission and loyalty. Tariq then retraced his steps to the Ebro. He marched along the river, but after a few days, upon arrival at Hara, he left the right bank and struck out across the plain to Briviesca, which surrendered without a fight. The first place where Tariq met opposition in Galicia was Amaya, where he fought and defeated the Gothic garrison and sacked the town. After this, the towns of Leon and Astorga submitted peacefully to the Muslims. While Tariq was subduing the Basques in the mountains of Vasconia, Musa had left the Ebro a few miles ahead of Saragossa and taken Tarazona and Soria. After this, as he penetrated deeper into Old Castile, he found that the Gothic counts had neither the means nor the will to challenge him. All submitted readily on terms offered by Musa, which they found to be more benign than any they could have expected, or would themselves have offered their enemies. An interesting light is shed on Musa's political skill by the way in which he used the Christian clergy as intermediaries to discourage Gothic leaders from resistance, in case fear of Muslim arms and the certainty of defeat at Muslim hands were not sufficient to do so. Bishop Opas, brother of the late King Witiza, who had plotted against Roderick, was with Musa during this operation and did much to facilitate his advance. Opas was anxious to show his gratitude for the generous treatment he had received from the Muslims, and did so by fully cooperating with the conquerors. He was later to be appointed Archbishop of Toledo by Musa. The extent to which the bishops went out of their way to placate the conquerors is shown by what one of them said to Musa. "We have found you in our book of Daniel, where you are described as the hunter of the Basques. You have 1 foot on land and 1 foot in the sea. You strike here and you kill. You strike there and you kill." Musa was not deceived by the words of the priest. He was too old and too experienced to be taken in by such flattery, but he was glad to hear the words as evidence that the Christians were bowing low to please their new conquerors. Marching through the rolling plains of Castile, Musa occupied various towns on the north bank of the river Duero, in all of which he confiscated the treasures of the palaces and the churches. After the fall of Valladolid, he detached a column which took Salamanca, while with the rest of the army he advanced to Villabaruz, a town between Rio Seco and Villalon. At Villabaruz, to his surprise, a Gothic garrison put up a fierce resistance, but this too was overcome and the town taken by storm. From here Musa went on to take Benavente, which marked the limit of his westward advance. On this march, more than in his previous operations, he encountered a people who lived like beasts. Musa arrived at Benavente at about the time that Tariq got to Astorga, and here he received intimation from Tariq that bands of Christian soldiers were gathering in the mountains to the north, the Cantabrians, with intent to oppose the Muslim advance. The two generals had driven a broad swath through the center of the Castilian plain without touching the Cantabrian mountains. Musa now took the decision to march north in order to crush the remaining hostiles, who were obviously the last of those who still harbored hopes of a successful resistance to the invading army. Musa joined Tariq at Astorga, and here the two generals set their combined forces in motion towards the north. The army marched through Leon and then took a route which ran east of the present Leon-Oviedo highway. The Muslims got to the pass of Tarna, and from here followed the course of the river Nalon to Oviedo, which they occupied without opposition. 5 miles north of Oviedo, at the town of Lucas Asternum, or Santa Maria di Lugo, or Luc as the Arabs called it, or Lugo de la Nera as it is now known, the Muslims met their last stiff resistance of the campaign. The Muslims played havoc with the defenders of Lugo. They flattened the town, and this was the last major tactical action in Musa's conquest of Spain. Many Christians succeeded in effecting their escape from the doomed town and took shelter in the mountains known as Picos de Europa, peaks of Europe. Musa established his base in the vicinity of Lugo and sent columns into the mountains to hunt down the survivors. It was a difficult operation because of the rugged nature of the mountains with their steep ridges and deep ravines. Nevertheless, the Muslims achieved a fair degree of success. The columns killed many miscreants before returning to report that if any of the wretched stragglers survived in the more inaccessible parts of the mountains, they would no doubt die of cold and starvation. While these columns were clearing the nearer part of the Picos de Europa, Tariq had advanced and captured Gijon, where the Muslims looked for the first time at the Cantabrian Sea or the Bay of Biscay, which extends into the Atlantic Ocean. Gijon now became the capital of this new northern province of Muslim Spain with Tariq as its first Muslim governor. Meanwhile, yet other columns sent by Musa occupied the northwestern corner of Spain, which now comprises the province of Galicia, with its principal towns of Lugo and La Coruña. With the successful conclusion of these operations, with the clearance of the Cantabrian Mountains and the occupation of the northwestern corner of the peninsula, Musa and Tariq had taken all there was to take of Spain. There was no more to be taken, no more enemies to fight, no more resistance to overcome. Spain now belonged. It was now August 714, the very end of 95 Hijri. A magnificent campaign had come to a glorious end, brilliantly conceived, brilliantly executed. Within the space of 5 months, thanks to the wise direction and masterly organization of Musa and the bold leadership of Tariq, the Muslims had conquered the whole northern half of Spain from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean, going as far as Narbonne in France. This would not have been possible without the light, fast-moving division of Tariq, which sped from objective to objective, while the heavier main body of the army under Musa followed at a slower pace. During 5 action-packed months, the Muslims had marched 2,500 miles, but they would not march any more, not under Musa and Tariq. One day in August, at the end of the campaign just described at Lugo, Musa mounted his horse. Where he was headed we do not know, but he was not destined to start whatever journey he had in mind, for suddenly an Arab traveler, obviously having completed a long and tiring journey, rode up to him and caught the reins of his horse, ordering him back to Damascus. He was the second messenger of Caliph al-Walid. Since this messenger came barely 2 months after the first, Maurice, and a fast courier would take a month to cover the distance between Damascus and Lugo, the Caliph could not have known that Musa was not obeying his order to return. We can only guess that the Caliph felt that Musa would need more persuasion than a single order to give up his cherished design of continuing his war against the enemies of Allah. So another messenger, this one named Abu Nasr, arrived in Spain and rode fast to Lugo. Having found Musa, he caught the reins of Musa's horse and delivered the Caliph's letter. It contained a rebuke for the general, and it conveyed to Musa the personal orders of the Caliph. A. To leave the army in Spain under suitable command arrangements. B. To return to Damascus. And C. To bring Tariq with him. By now, the work of consolidation had been more or less completed. All the principal towns of Spain were in Muslim hands, garrisoned by Muslim soldiers with Muslim governors appointed for all districts. The Muslim tribes, Arab and Berber, had chosen the districts where they wished to settle and got down to living in the conquered territory as permanent residents. Whenever a tribe or clan liked a place, it took up its abode in it. Many clans occupied towns abandoned by the Christians. Spain was now fully under Muslim control. Another large country added to the world of Islam, where the new faith would spread rapidly at the expense of other religions. Early in September 714, still the very end of 95 Hijri, Musa bin Nusair began his journey back to sea. End of chapter 15.